Welcome to SomeGuy's Garage. Today, Project Wheeled RC Tank Part 5.
Straight to work. Most of Part 5 will be the assembly with a bit of machining, and then a quick test drive, so stay tuned to the end. But starting off with the plywood to mount the electronics.
Alright, now that I have the plywood in there, I'm going to go and attach all the bearing mounts.
All 12 bearing mounts are held in with 4 M3 hex head screws each. Since the holes in the chassis weren't perfect, it was a bit fiddly to get them all lined up. I used the shaft to make sure that each of the 2 bearings were aligned properly before tightening things down.
There we go, have all the bearing mounts in, both at the front and the back. Next up, we'll put in all of the motors and the shafts and gears and everything.
The motors were bolted down and the first stage of shafts and sprockets put in. Then it was time for chains. I'm using a chain splitter to split them at the right length, measured just by marking the link with the chain lying on the sprockets. After that, they get positioned on the sprockets and a joining link is used to put the chain back together.
And there we go, I have the 2 motors mounted and the chains hooked up for those to go to the first stage of gear reduction here on both sides.
Then the second stage goes together the same way. Before putting the shafts in, I cut small grooves for snap rings, which are used to retain the shafts.
Have one side in, all the chain drive is installed, the chains are put together. So we'll just do the other side now.
Once the chains were done, I installed the main parts of the electronics into the chassis. Part 1 and 2 covered the electronics in more detail, so check those out if you want to know more about how they work. Now, onto the wheels.
Let's take a quick look at the wheels we're going to be using. These are just your standard utility wheels. They're, $10, and these ones I had just lying around anyway. They're a split rim, so you can actually take the 2 halves apart. They also come with a bearing. There's a 5/8 bore bearing here in the middle. Those will need to come out because obviously we need to drive them. I've already taken out the bearings from this one, you can see, and you get a fairly big through hole in them. What I'm going to end up doing, I've already made one, but I'm going to make a bunch of these sleeves that have the 1/2 inch size drive shaft that will go through them, and those slip down inside here, and the screw you can see in the little hole here as well. The hole there, the screw will go into that, and that'll give me the right diameter for the drive shafts and how I'll fit it all together.
To get the rest of the wheels ready, I first took them all apart.
I probably should have let the air out of this before I started to split the rim. You can see how handy these things are. Alright, now that we have them split, you can see there's actually 2 bearings in them, one on either side. There's one there, one there. They're pretty rough, but to actually get these out, you need a tool called a blind hole bearing puller. There might be other ways to do it, but it's kind of the tool that works best. So let me show you that. So this is the blind hole bearing puller. What they have are these little jaws that go on a slide hammer, and when you tighten them down, you can see they expand. So that lets you get a grip on the inside of the bearing, rather than trying to have to knock it through when you only have a 5/8 hole all the way through. So they're set with the different sizes for different bearings. The other place you typically see these used is for a pilot bearing when you're doing a clutch on a vehicle. But yeah, you'll see that now as I take those bearings out. And there you can see the bearings pulled out, and if we take a look here, you can see how the teeth spread in behind to get a good grip on it. And then to get them off, you just loosen everything up. And there's the bearing.
And then I just had to repeat this process a bunch more times.
Then to knock out the other bearing, I'm just going to use a bushing driver set here. It just has a bunch of different sizes or diameters of metal bushings that you can use to knock things out. And there we go, we have the other bearing knocked out. Good to go. Alright, so we have all that apart. The next thing I gotta do is, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but the inside of these bores is not exactly the cleanest thing. There's a small weld bead or something down the inside here. So I'll just head over to the lathe to clean those up. I'm all set up in the lathe here. I have one of the halves of the rim in there and a boring bar in the tool holder. And then I'll just take a very, very light skim cut on the inside just to clean that up like I was saying. Don't know how well it's going to come across on camera, but these hubs on these things are quite out around. You'll see here when I turn the lathe back on. Hopefully. Let's try slowing it down here quite a bit. But they do wobble a fair bit. And if you had seen my short that I posted earlier, there's quite a bit of vibration because of that, given the speed these are turning at. I'm going to give it a shot just to see what happens with these, but I might have to try a different kind of wheel to make this work.
Now, before I go on to the mounts I ended up going with, I did try a different design with steel that would bolt up to the 4 holes in the wheel, but it just didn't work out very well, and I gave up filming it. On to the actual wheel mounts I will be using. If you've been following along in the series, this is all pretty similar to the sprocket and bearing holders, using the same 1.5 inch 6061 aluminum to make the sleeves. On the lathe, I start by facing the part, turning it down to size, drilling the center, and then parting it off. Here's how they fit, both inside the wheel and on the shaft. I drill a hole in the wheel hub and mark out some holes, then over to the drill press to make a couple holes, followed up with some tapping for the set screw and pin. After that, the wheels got reassembled and the sleeves installed so we can mount the wheels on the RC. One more thing to make before we jump back to the final assembly. I machined some Delrin that will be used where the chain rides on the tensioners. These are pretty simple, just a hole in the middle and cut off to length.
So I've jumped a bit ahead. It was difficult to film some of the sprockets and putting all the chains together, just too many things in the way. But I do have the sprockets all mounted with chain on them. I might have to take a link out of a couple of them still because they are a bit loose even with the tensioners. You'll have seen me turn the tensioners on the lathe. It's just a piece of Delrin and they ride on a bolt, and that just gives me a little bit of adjustment for the tension of the chains. Motors are mounted in tension, so this side's pretty good. Those are all right. I don't have all of the circuitry in here. I basically just have something to mount the batteries in. This actually lifts out, but the batteries go on there and they kind of slot in the back here like this. And then have the motor drivers themselves, the radio receiver, and hooked up to the 2 motors. So I don't have any of the low voltage cutoff or even any of the fusing, but just to test it, I wanted to, keep it simple so I didn't have to tear as much apart. But it does move. I've got some vertical video of that you'll see here. And it moves pretty fast once it gets going. I am going to have a little bit of trouble with keeping everything both in line and tight on the shafts. The set screws by themselves are not going to hold, so I'm going to have to pin through, which I was expecting to have to do anyway, but definitely has come to light now that I've tried it out once or twice here. But all in all, it's coming together. So we'll call it a day with part 5 here. Next time I will finish off the rest of the chassis, get some covers for the top and bottom, mount up the rest of the electronics, and then maybe we'll take it for a test drive for the first time all together. So if you're interested in seeing that, make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.